distribution within that group of machines. And within that group, we can impose additional finer-grained controls if we like. So that's a decision that we have made at the objective layer. And basically, I have just said this, that this aspect is required to support superdistribution, and then we get the ability to support fine-grained access and policy mechanism separation. And once we allow any degree of offline access, you have to accept that you are going to not have completely instant and immediate revocation. It's not going to happen because there is a period of offline access when the revocation information may be out of date. All right? Because unless you're updating all the time, you're not going to have the most up-to-date. There's going to be some window of delay and lag in your revocation. But these are just consequences of the more important decisions that have been imposed or have been sort of laid out as constraints on the problem. There's no free lunch. We have to pay a price for some of these decisions. So I'm going to look at the policy models, and I'm going to go over these slides fairly quickly. So here, looking at the various states of a member in a group. So a member is a machine, which is presumably tied to a user. So you start off by never having been a member of the group, then you become a member, and then maybe you leave the group and possibly rejoin. So that's sort of the life cycle. And this sort of joining and leaving a group arises many times in security situations. One common example is in multicast groups, which has been fairly well studied in the literature. But here, the characteristics of these groups are a little bit different and a little bit less well defined. So, in the first state, there is no problem. If you have never been a member of the group, you get no access, and that's the end of it. But in this state, what does it mean? While you're currently in the group, do you get access only to those documents that were made available after your joining time? Do you get access to the entire set of documents that were made available to the group from day one? And are there any additional restrictions? Okay, so we have some policy choices here. It's not completely clear-cut as to which one of these we should support. Okay, in fact, we should be able to support all of these in a desirable implementation. What happens when you leave the group? Do you retain some access? Do you lose all your access? Do you continue to have access to documents that were made available during your membership? Okay, so you have to answer these questions. And the point of the policy model layer is to settle these questions. And what happens when you rejoin? Okay, do we disallow that? If you're allowed only access to documents after you joined, what does that mean? Does that include my previous period of membership or only this period of membership? So we need to clarify at the policy model layer what the answers to these questions are. And it is true that you don't want to sort of escalate all these questions to the objective layer for decision making. Some of these you may decide to just handle locally, and others you may need to escalate back to the objective layer to reconcile. So this is just a way of trying to address this systematically. These use cases, I'm not going to go through them, but basically they are illustrating various combinations of policies that you can impose in these states are all, you can come up with reasonable use cases for all of them. Okay, so just take my word for that. And then there's a similar question when you ask what happens to a document. When a document is put into a group, well, a document can be removed from the group, and then maybe it can get re-added to the group. So you kind of have a similar set of questions. Again, I'm not going to sort of step through these systematically, but the point is, at the policy model layer, these are the kind of questions that we need to be worried about. And we don't need to start thinking about how we are going to do this. The bigger question is, what is it that we are trying to do? Let's try to understand that. And in order to focus on what it is we are trying to do, the approach we have suggested is to forget about revocation. All right? This is one lesson that anyone who's been involved with access control learns and relearns many times in their lives and forgets many times in their lives, that revocation is sort of the stumbling block until the point where you worry about revocation. Everything looks nice and pretty, and then you bring revocation into the picture, and suddenly you have certificate revocation lists, and you have all kinds of mess to deal with. Okay, so let's not worry about it. Let's just assume that somehow magically revocation will happen instantly and preemptively. Instantly means it will take effect immediately. Preemptively means if you're in the middle of doing an access and I revoke your membership in the group, boom, you're gone. Okay, so that's preemptive. And we will worry about how to approximate this, because we know in practice it's going to be impossible for us to actually implement this. But let's focus on the real policies of the real policy questions of the problem and just abstract away, put this revocation issue on the side and deal with it later. Okay, so that's our approach. And let me. Okay, so we in order to do this, we assume there are group administrators who will enroll and disenroll members, and add and remove documents. And then we come up with some specific policies for these various states that we have shown. Members can only access documents created after they joined a group. And once you leave the group, you can access documents created during the period of your membership. This is just a specific case of the policy combinations that I talked about earlier. And, we would like to come up with models where these kinds of policies are enforced in relatively well-defined places, so that if I change the policy, I know exactly where to go and change the enforcement or implementation. Okay. Now, the final piece of the picture I'm going to present is the Yukon model. The Yukon model takes a more sophisticated approach to access control than the traditional access matrix model. The access matrix model simply shows you authorization, and it shows you a sort of, if you have the ability to read a file, how many times can you read it? Can you read it today, tomorrow? So it doesn't really, the notion of consumable rights was present in some of the early literature on access control, but it kind of disappeared over time because perhaps people didn't find it useful, perhaps people found it too complicated. But it has come back again, especially sort of when the DRM activity picked up. I may want you to be able to read this document 5 times, but not 20 times. And, I want to sort of put some kind of limitations on how often or how frequently you might be able to do some things. All right? So that's sort of intrinsic to the usage control idea. And there is a notion of authorization, obligation, and conditions, and attribute based. And so rather than trying to walk you through the usage control model, I'm just going to go through my examples and applying it to information sharing, and I'll develop the ideas as I go along. Okay? So at the policy layer, the operations that we need to model are adding, removing a member from a group, adding, removing a document from a group, and then the fundamental, the operation that we are really after is a user trying to read a document. Okay, that's the one that is the central operation. And we are going to maintain some attributes of members, and we're going to maintain some attributes of documents. So the member attribute tells you whether you're a member of the group or not. The join timestamp tells you when you joined the group. The leave timestamp tells you when you left the group. And likewise for documents, we have these attributes. And basically, in order to sort of track the life history of a member, initially all these attributes are null. When you are enrolled into the group by a group administrator, the attributes change as indicated. You are marked as being a member of the group, and your joint timestamp is assigned a value. Your leave timestamp is still null. When you are disenrolled from the group, your membership attribute becomes false, but your join and leave, your leave timestamp is added, and your join live timestamp is left unchanged. Okay.